One Israel Fund, beating to the rhythm of the heartland, enhancing and securing daily life in the Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria for over 25 years. Join us and make a difference. Eve Harow, Director of Tourism and Community Development for One Israel Fund. Welcome to our latest in our series of webinars. It is August 12th, 2021, and since it's dark here in Israel, the 5th day of Elul, 5781, and that is an important date, and that's kind of dictated tonight's topic. But before we get to our very esteemed guest, I wanted to fill you in, for those of you who are part of the greater One Israel Fund family, that our family just got a little bigger. 2 weeks ago, Shana, who normally runs these webinars from our office in New York, gave birth to a healthy baby boy. So tonight, so she is on maternity leave. I think that's politically correct to say that someone who gave birth is on maternity leave. I think we can still do that. And Cyril is womaning this, and I want to thank Cyril, and I'm sure it's going to be just great. We've been busy here on the Israeli side as well with playgrounds and all the usual things that we do. Of course, security. Our director of security right now is in the United States, Mark Provisor, on the East Coast, if any of you want to grab the chance and have a meeting with him. There have been events in New York as well, barbecues, whatever can be done in these crazy times, we are doing. And something that I'm really excited that we're doing here in Israel is preparing for the sabbatical year. We have been able to take funds that were donated, maybe by some of you, and I want to thank you, in order to help different communities plant gardens before the Shmitta year where we're not allowed to plant. So we have helped them with putting in watering systems that will of course last for many years, and trees and shrubs to beautify the community so that they can do that now. Otherwise, they're going to have to wait at least another year. And when, of course, when it comes to fir trees, there's all kinds of issues. So that has been a very timely project that we've been doing now. Really excited about it. And of course, if you follow us and you get our emails and you go on our website, then you'll be updated on all that. And you should keep an eye out for our next virtual video that is going to be sent out within the next couple of days. I interviewed Anita Tucker, formerly of Netzer Chazani in Gush Katif, now replanted in her new home. It has been 16 years, of course, since the expulsion from Gush Katif, and One Israel Fund is still involved, of course, with the former residents of Gaza and following their lives and helping them as much as we possibly can via you. And so tonight's guest kind of brings together a few things that I just spoke about. He lives near Gaza. Someone said there is no sound. There is no sound. Okay, Cyril, are we there? Okay, we will get that fixed, I hope. Tell me when there is sound. Somebody let me know. Let's see. Oh, no, someone else said they do have sound, so maybe it's just a local problem. Okay, in any event, our guest for tonight, Aharon Ariel Lavi, has been on my radar for quite a few years. Have had the privilege of interviewing him on my podcast, Our Rejuvenation, a few times. He thinks way out of the box, and that's something that I very much appreciate. And I asked him to join us tonight because among the things that he has done is a lot of research and a lot of thinking about the Shmitta year. However, he is just about to earn a PhD in a different topic, which I'm going to let him talk about because he'll do a much better job at explaining the amazing work that he's doing than I will. So Aharon Ariel Lavi, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know you're not near Gaza today. You decided to go to someplace quieter, which is way up north near the Lebanese border. So from the frying pan into the fire, but hopefully you're all having a wonderful vacation. It's staying quiet up in the north. And your window's open just in case it doesn't. So in any event, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Eve.
All right, so tell the viewers. Yeah, tell the viewers. First, let's start with your dissertation, and then we'll move into the Shmitta.
Dissertation. Well, maybe I'll just introduce myself first, and then say a few words about the dissertation.
Give your background.
So, yeah, my background. So I'm 38. I live in a place called Shuva, next to the Gaza border. I have 5 children. The youngest is 3-month-old, actually. He was born during Shomer HaChomot, just a couple of days before the last military operation. And maybe to give you just a background that will also use, I'm going to use it as a segue to the Shmitta issue. I grew up secular in the north, actually, in a place called Kiryat Tivon. no special Jewish background except for the fact I speak Hebrew and live in Israel and studied some Bible in high school. And I had some pen pals from America. I was interested in many different issues back in the mid 1990s. I had web access pretty early on because my father was and still is in high tech. And one day I get this email from a non-Jewish friend who tells me that he's very envious of me. So I asked him, why are you so envious of me? So he tells me, because you can speak Hebrew. I said, that's great. I mean, I'm Israeli. That's what we speak here. I didn't go to university for that. And what's so special about Hebrew? So he said, you can read all those books like the Zohar and the Talmud and Kabbalah and all that kind of stuff. Now, he didn't know, and I didn't know that those books are not really in Hebrew, at least not in modern Hebrew that we can actually read or understand. But his interest sparked my interest, and that sent me on a long voyage. It took something like 7 years, and I became religious at the age of 22, I think, something like that. And one of the things I investigated and looked into, which also brought me to the issue of Shmitta, is really what kind of insights and or thoughts or ideas can we find in Jewish tradition and Jewish philosophy and Jewish thought that can relate to contemporary economic, social, environmental issues that are just modern predicaments that we all deal with. And I found a whole world there, and Shmitta is only just one part of that. And I'll get back to Shmitta in a minute. I just want to say, as you said, a word about my dissertation. So I've done my BA in economics, my MA in history and philosophy of science, and doing now my PhD at the Ben Gurion University on the relationship between Israel and the Jewish diaspora, and more specifically on how US-based ideas, such as conservative ideas, actually made Aliyah into Israel through channels or segues such as the Tikva Fund, the Shalem Center. This story has never been told actually in an orderly manner. So I'm studying that whole thing, but that's really a whole conversation in of itself.
You're ensuring that I'll have you back for another webinar in the future when your dissertation is published. That's what you've done.
Pleasure. I hope to finish it in a year, but as you probably know, PhDs are never really finished in the time they're supposed to be finished. So I hope to finish it not too late after the deadline. Okay, so should we dive right into the Shmitta?
Yeah. Yes, because I read your book that came out a few years ago. And I think that given that the Shmitta year is coming upon us in just, 3 weeks or so, and that most of our audience probably, unfortunately, does not live in Israel and is not going to be as consumed, really, if you will, with the issues and the challenges that we're going to have this next year. So I really wanted for you to illuminate for us. And we had spoken about it before, not necessarily what to do with your cucumber peels in February when you're living in Israel, and how you dispose of what isn't just garbage in the next year, but has a different level, but more the ideas behind Shmitta and how you have juxtaposed your very interesting background and the different places that you come from, and been able to look at the biblical text and some of the biblical ideas in a way that people perhaps raised religious and seeing things in a certain framework from the beginning would not have been able to do.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to give a brief overview of Shmitta, just the 7 parts of Shmitta. Most people don't even know it has all those different parts. And then I'll give a brief overview of just historically how it evolved. And I will then say a few words about how it can relate to like contemporary economic issues, specifically the volatile job market and economic crisis that we've experienced in the last generation quite a few times. And we'll just leave a few more minutes for questions. Okay.
Absolutely terrific.
So to make it easier to follow, I would like to share my screen. I just need permission to do that. But by the time I get permission, let me just give you the basic facts. So Shmitta, like many other things, is a commandment that we got in the Torah. We got it in Mount Sinai. It's the only commandment that that the Torah specifies where it was given before it gives it.
You froze. Oh, no. No. You're back. Aharon?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry. There was a
Okay,
glitch.
that's all right. Okay, as long as
Uh,
it wasn't Hezbollah, then we're okay. We'll go with just the
no, no.
glitch.
As I say, I live on the Gaza border, so we went on vacation to the northern border, and just the same.
What's the difference? Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
The first time I landed in America, like maybe 10 years ago, I was amazed by the fact that you can just drive and drive and drive and never hit a border. You can drive for like 3 weeks and not hit a fence. And here in Israel, you drive for 6 hours.
Uh-huh.
It's either Hamas or Hezbollah, depending on the side you go to.
Yeah, it's hard to get too lost here. Mhm.
Okay, I was asking for permission to share my screen. But in the meantime, at which point did you lose me?
I don't know if she can. No, it was just for a couple of seconds. We're good.
Okay.
She said she doesn't have a way of giving you permission for the screen share. All right, we'll figure that out. Just
Okay,
let's
it's
keep
okay.
going. Okay.
We can live without it. So as I said, Shmitta is a special commandment in the sense that it was given in a special context in the Torah, but even more than that, and again connecting this to the land of Israel and even to the situation we're in up to this day, Shmitta is specifically noted as one of the reasons for the first exile. So the Talmud is very clear about it. The prophets, even before the Talmud, Jeremiah is very clear about it. That one of the main reasons for the first destruction in 586 years BCE was the non-compliance with Shmitta laws back then.
So that's huge. That puts it up there with murder and idol worship and like all these tremendous moral sins.
That's a very good question. It's even more than that. So in the Talmud we have, as we know, we have 3 commandments three prohibitions that we're not allowed to do, even if it's going to cost us our lives, which is again, murder, which is avodah zarah, like idol worship,
right,
and gilui arayot, which is incest, I think in English, right? Or sexual misbehavior,
inappropriate sexual behavior. Exactly.
Inappropriate sexual behavior. So for just to understand, so if someone puts a gun to your head and says, either you kill that person or I kill you, so you should say, okay, I'm giving up on my life. I'm not going to kill anyone else in order to save my life. One concept. Now the Talmud also says in a different place that the 3 reasons that exile comes to the world is avodah zarah, idol worship, gilui arayot, and Shmitta. So it replaces, when it comes to the national level, an exile is to some extent death, actually, or temporary death in the national level. When it comes to that, it replaces one of those 3 components with Shmitta and Yovel specifically. So both the prophets and the sages, Chazal, took Shmitta very, very seriously, more than many other things that we know of. And some commentators even compare Shmitta with Shabbat, with like one of those things that the entire Torah depends on. Now I think there's a reason why it's so important. But first, let's explain what it is, okay? I don't know exactly who's in the audience. Let's just make sure that all...
you can try and share your screen now. Let's see if that works. If not, we'll just continue. Yeah. Okay. Cyril, thank you. Okay.
So that's Shmitta 101. Just a word. The logo you see here, that's the project I manage today. It's Hakel. It's the Jewish Intentional Communities Incubator. We have a network of 130 communities all over the world in 30 different countries, trying to strengthen Jewish life in connection to Israel. So I get that in our network, and I'm just going to use the same presentation. So Shmitta actually has, surprisingly, 7 components. So first of all, Shmitta comes every 7 years. The next one is going to start, you said we're now starting the Hey Elul, so it's going to start in 25 days on Aleph Tishrei, the first day of the new year. It's going to last for 1 year, and then we're going to start counting another cycle of 6 years with a Shmitta at the end, and it goes on and on and on. Now, the most basic part about Shmitta is, let me just start the show how to do that. so the most basic part about Shmitta is the Shabbat Haaretz part of it, which is literally a Shabbat of the land. So we need to give the land a rest. We need to let it lie fallow. We're not allowed to do not any work in the land. There are many details. A whole book about the halachot of Shabbat Haaretz, but we won't go into all that. But basically, we're supposed to leave the land to itself. That's one piece of it. We're supposed to give a free access to everybody to our produce. So even though it's our private property, we need to give access to everybody, to the poor people, even to the animals, to eat from our fruit and produce. The produce of that year has a special kind of sanctity, so we need to treat it very carefully. So it's really a Shabbat for the land. That was the main piece of it. That was also the most complicated piece of Shmitta. Then the second piece, or the second part of Shmitta, is the debt relief. Debt relief happens at the end of the Shmitta year. There are some opinions that say that it happens at the beginning of the year. The Rosh says that, but according to most poskim, it happens at the end of the Shmitta year. And that means that, for example, if I gave you a loan today, if I gave you a loan of 100 shekels, and you don't pay it back by the time the sun sets, not in 25 days, but in 1 year and 25 days, the end of the Shmitta year, then I'm not allowed to ask you back for the money, and you don't have to give it back. If you give it back, then the Talmud says that's a righteous and nice thing to do, but basically that is released.
So the obvious question is, who's going to be lending money at the end of the 6th year? Because the chances are that you're not going to get it back.
Well, the Torah predicted that, actually, and said, so you need to be careful not to do. Dvar Blial is like a very mischievous or very evil thing to do. Beware not to do the evil deed of not lending money to the poor people, because you know it's going to be released. Now, what happened is the people did stop to give it, to do that, and then Hillel Zaken had to actually, that's about a few decades before the year of zero. See, I'm giving the non-Jewish years, it's just easier to follow that way. He actually ruled the principle, which actually allows us, I won't go into the whole mechanism, but actually bypasses the debt relief and allows us not to remit our debts. Now, I want to say a word about that. Maybe we'll say more about it later, but debt relief was not just a Jewish idea in the ancient Near East, in Mesopotamia, in Babylon, in Assyria, even in the Roman Empire in its first years. Debt relief was a pretty common practice, because rulers had to give their own people a break sometimes. Otherwise, people would just move out of the country or want to recruit to the military, so they had to do those debt releases. The unique thing about the Jewish debt release is that it's predetermined, pre-planned, and it has a fixed date. So it's not up to the ruler to decide when it's up to him. It's in the calendar, and it's like a constitution. It happens at a certain date, and everybody knows it's going to happen, and they can plan accordingly. And I will say more about that later. By the way, I guess most of our audience is Americans, right?
Yeah, I would say so. North Americans.
Just a fun fact for Americans and also for non-Americans: the torch that you have, the Statue of Liberty. So people think that torch is like to light the way, or the light of freedom, or something like that.
Right.
No, the torch comes from the Roman Empire. The way they use the council debts is they would the emperor they did it only a few times, and then they stopped doing it, and then that's one of the reasons they collapsed. But in the early years when they did it, so the emperor would take a torch and burn the entire archive where they kept all the loans and all the financial documents. And when he burned it, that's actually that it's like you shut down the computers.
It's like freedom.
Yeah.
Right. You wiped everything out.
Like
I never knew that.
Clean slate for everybody. So that's where they got the torch from. That's why it's a symbol of freedom. Just a fun fact to know about how back things go. Now Hakel that's the third component of Shmitta, and it means that again after the Shmitta year, in the Sukkot after the Shmitta year, everybody gather in Jerusalem in order to sort of like reunite or reinitiate our brit, our covenant between ourselves and with God. So the king would read parts of the Torah, and everybody would celebrate Sukkot together. Now, everybody means everybody, including the women and children, because in regular years, only men above the age of 13 were obligated to come to Jerusalem for the Aliyah LaRegel, for the, I think it's pilgrimage.
The pilgrimage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But in Haker, once every 7 years, everybody had to come and like build this community in practice. Now, the fourth component is the Yovel, the Jubilee. So we count 7 Shmitta cycles, a Shmitta and a Shmitta and another Shmitta. 7 times 7 is 49 years. Then the 50th year is a Yovel year, which has 3 main things. One, it's also a Shmitta year. It's a Shabbat Haaretz year. So you actually have 2 Shmitta years, 2 Shabbat Haaretz years in a row. The
49 and 50, right. And I believe in English, it's called the Jubilee year. That's how it's been translated.
It's been translated into Jubilee year. The second component is that all slaves are released on Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year. No matter how long they've been enslaved or what they've done, they all go free. And the third component is that all of the lands go back to their original owners. So during those 50 years, I sell you all my land, you sell to someone else, whatever. We do all those real estate deals. But on the 50th year, I get my land back. Me or my heirs, the people who came after me from my family. Now the Jubilee is a very, very complicated thing to actually do in practice, to observe 2 Shabbat Haaretz years in a row. 1 Shabbat Haaretz, 1 Shmita year is complicated enough. As far as we know, Jubilee was not observed throughout most times, and we have evidence in the Bible that even when the Assyrians surrounded the city of Jerusalem, the Babylonians, so Jeremiah convinced the people to release their slaves. That was in 568 BCE, and when they saw that they left, they took the slaves back, and he said that this is one of the reasons that the destruction happens. He says, because you prevented dror. Dror is the Hebrew word for freedom in the Bible. Because you prevented dror from the slaves, I'm going to give dror freedom to the sword, which is going to annihilate you and destroy your nation and your country and your temple, which what happened 2 years later. The fifth component is the personal slave release. So every Hebrew slave in the Bible in those times could have been enslaved for up to 6 years, and then he or she would be freed at the end of the 6th year. The connection to Shmitta is a bit complicated. I won't go into all the details. I'm just giving it as a general framework. Then we have tzedakah, charity. So the basic system of charity, of giving or help and assistance to the less fortunate in the Bible and in the Talmud is primarily based on land, on farming and agricultural produce. So we give people access to our peah, to a side of the field, so they can harvest for themselves. There's gleaning and all of the other commandments. But there are certain gifts that we give to the poor people, or to the Levites, or the Kohanim, or that we need to take to the temple to eat, that are dependent on the time we are in the Shmitta cycle. So, for example, if we're in the first year of the Shmitta cycle, we take the fruit to Jerusalem. If it's the 3rd year, we give it as charity to the poor people. Now, the key point here is that people needed to know all the time which year is it in the Shmitta cycle. Is it the 1st year, the 2nd year, the 3rd year? Now we have evidence that even after the 2nd temple was destroyed, and there were almost no farmers in Israel, there were only small settlements in Jerusalem and Hebron, then later in Tzfat and Tveria, until the Zionist movement came, and the Galilee. People kept the Shmitta calendar. So we have evidence on tombs, for example, on matzavot, like tombstones. We have it also. We have it in the Qumran scrolls, that people would say, for example, this man and this woman were married the date of this and that in the third year of the Shmitta cycle. It was important for them.
Oh, wow.
Wait, even though there was no Shmitta, it was irrelevant because there was no land, and I mean there was land, but they had no farming. They kept the counting. And then the seventh part is the Millennium. The Talmud says that relates to the future. The Talmud says that I'm going to say it in Aramaic and then give that translation. So the original Aramaic saying is Shit alfei shnei have alma ve'elef echad charuv, which means in English that for 6,000 years the world is going to exist, and then in the seventh millennium it's going to be destroyed, or that's the literal translation. What the commentators say is that the seventh millennium, and as you said earlier, we're in the year of 5,781 years in the Hebrew counting. So we're getting
or
close,
maybe
close
more, but or maybe 167 years more. That's up for debate.
Yeah,
you might be closer than we think. Yes,
that's called the missing years. I'm actually going to get to that in a minute because it has impact on how we count the Shmitta cycles. But in any case, it should not be taken literally. It's not that in the year of 6,000 in the Hebrew calendar, Mashiach is going to come. It's even not allowed to calculate when exactly that's going to happen. But as an idea, the Talmud says that the world is going somewhere. It's going to a different reality, to some.
There'll be a radical change. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Now, it seems to us as a no-brainer, as like, okay, that's, everybody talk about it, that we're moving somewhere. But I want to explain that this is one of the key points, I think, that key ideas that Shmitta and Judaism in general brought to the world. And many people don't know that. So I'm going to ask you a question. We can't ask the entire audience, but people can write in the chat if they want.
Sure.
It's a very simple mathematical question. If I give you and I'm going to use it to exemplify the Jewish innovation in that field. If I give you the following series of numbers, 2, 4, 6, 8, what would be the next 2 or 3 numbers in this series?
10 and 12.
Yeah, it seems like self-evident, right? It's like third grade mathematics. Well,
right,
and it's true, but it's true in our culture. But if you would have asked someone in ancient Mesopotamia or Babylon the same question, the answer he or she would give you is 2, 4, 6, 8. Then it should be 6, 4, 2, and then 4, 6, 8, and it would just go in circles again and again and again, because their perception of reality was that history just repeats itself in circles, and it's not really going anywhere. It's just going to live the same thing again and again. And as far as I know, I'll be happy to be challenged by people in the audience, but as far as I know, the first time that, or the first people, the first nation, or the first religion that put forth the idea that yes, there are cycles. We live. Shmitta is a cycle. We respect cycles in Jewish law and Jewish tradition. We respect the circle, the calendar year. We respect the circle of life.
Right.
But beyond the circles, we are going somewhere. There is a trajectory. There is a purpose. There is a better future out there. As far as I know, Judaism, or back then, the Bible or the Hebrew people were the first to actually put it forth, which became, globally accepted, and has huge impacts. I mean, that's what drives innovation. That's what drives economy. That's what drives taking risks to create a better future. It's not to be taken lightly. It's a huge idea and a huge innovation that we now take for granted.
And most of us just assume that it was always like that. We don't realize what we brought to the world.
But when you study the history of ideas and you look into how things evolved, then you understand this wasn't. It was a breakthrough. It was a breakthrough, like the idea that all men are born equal. That's also a Jewish idea. Like the idea of only one God, with no helpers, assistants, family, anything. Just one God. That's it. Period. End of story, or beginning of story, actually.
Right.
These are huge ideas that Judaism brought to the world, and that we, now billions of people take them for granted, like as if that's what everybody thought all along. But no, someone put it in there.
Mhm.
purposefully. So that's basically
So there's something that just comes to mind based on some of the things that you said. One of them is how outrageous that idea is that your family gets their land back, especially when you compare it to, let's say, the feudal system, where people could have land that was in their family for who knows how long. And at some point, they're just working a little piece of it and maybe taking some corn because they fell into debt and someone took over their own land. So that is just an incredible idea. And when I spoke to you, I think it was at the beginning of the pandemic, that when we had an interview, we spoke.
Yeah.
And one of the things you said to me that I thought was so amazing was we needed to prepare for the pandemic. And I said to you, how could we do that? Can you hear me? Are you there?
Yeah.
Hello. Okay. And I said, what do you mean? And you said to me, well, that's one of the underlying messages the Torah is giving us when you talk about cycles. Every few years, there's some kind of a crisis. It might be a global, like a major climate kind of a crisis. It might be some kind of financial crisis. But the fact that a lot of people were caught unawares when the pandemic hit, lost their jobs, had to change, whatever it was. He said, you said to me, what the Torah is trying to tell us is that every few years, you need to prepare for a tough year. So in the Torah, it's every 7 years because we know it's coming. As you said, they knew when the third year was, they knew when the fifth year was. But in this world, somehow we're working towards the future, but somehow we don't prepare maybe as we should for a year where we're going to literally have to tighten our belts. And maybe that's one of the messages that the Torah is giving that's incredibly relevant to today's world that we missed. I thought that was like an astounding way of thinking.
It goes even deeper than that. I think the idea that that Shmitta presents is not
Aharon? Oh. Okay. Oh, it's lonely here. Let's see if we can get Aharon back. Is what I said so shocking? It was his idea. All right, guys, just hold with us here. He's obviously not in a place where the infrastructure is as good as we would like it to be. Something we can't count on is even infrastructure for Zoom calls. We'll see if we can't get him back and continue this. In the meantime, I can tell you some of the things that When Israel Fund is up to. We just refurbished a park in Okdim, helped out a school with a program called Thinkering in Rosh Tzurim. Wait, no, there we go. Are you back?
Yeah. Sorry for those glitches.
Okay, you're there. Somebody didn't like my question. Okay, so go ahead.
Okay, so what I was saying is that not only the Torah, the Shmitta teaches us that crises are part of life, like you said. I think there's a deeper notion here, which says that if we embed pre-planned and timed and controlled crises into the system, we might be able to alleviate some, not all, but some of the severe consequences of unplanned and unexpected and surprising crisis.
Right.
And I will try to explain why. So let's start with the first point. What Shmitta tells us through all of its components, I can't go into all the details right now, but I'm happy to elaborate more. You mentioned my book. So the first book was published about 10 years ago about Judaism and economics. I have an upcoming book just about Shmitta, which will hopefully be published in Hebrew in a few months, and then later next year in English as well.
Terrific.
So I'm going to give just the bottom lines right now, but So it teaches us that crisis is a part of life. And although it has this notion of like, yes, we're going to a better future, there will be some redemption, there will be a geula at the end, but by the time we get there, we're going to live through a cycle of different crises. Now we can just wait for them to happen. That's okay. That's one way to handle this. But we can also try and prepare. Now, prepare doesn't mean that we just prepare stuff to the time the crisis. It also means that we educate ourselves and put those crises into the system. Now, I think, for example, I'm going to give an example that comes from the Israeli Air Force that I heard from a friend, and even if some of the details are not completely accurate, I think the idea makes perfect sense, and you'll see why in a minute. They realized that one of the main things that drive, by the way, that's what also economists understand today. One of the things that drive economic crisis, for example, is over optimism of investors, because I'm not an investment consultant. I'm not going to give financial consultant over a Zoom call or a Zoom webinar. But again, cautiously, if you look at markets nowadays, if you look at markets 7 years ago and 14 years ago, when you see those huge upticks, you see the markets are just running higher and higher and higher. Sometimes, not always, sometimes it means that what we have is a bubble. People believe that something is worth much more than it's actually worth. It has a greater value than everybody really believes. But I think that they are the only ones who get it, and everybody believes that become very optimistic that the market is going to keep going and going and going, and then the bluff is exposed and the markets fall. Now it happens again and again and again. If you look at the financial history, just a recent financial history, so we had one crisis in 2000, 2001, the dot-com, then we had 2008, then we had 2015 in the Far East, in the Asian markets, then we had COVID. COVID is a different kind of crisis, but we have those crises that repeat themselves quite regularly. So going back to the Israeli Air Force, they saw that once you have an accident, God forbid, once you have a serious training accident, you have a period without accidents, and then you have almost accidents, and then you have small accidents, and then you have a big one, and then the graph falls down again. And it happens in cycles, not of 7 years, but it happens in cycles. Now the explanation is simple. It's not mysticism. It's not simple, but it's the explanation is rational. Because once
logical,
logical, it makes sense. Because once you have a serious accident, someone gets killed, God forbid, everybody all of a sudden start to behave. Say, okay, so something just happened. It means that those safety rules that we have, that sometimes seem so ridiculous, don't make sense, there are too many of them, they're actually important, because if they have kept that rule, those people would not have died. So people just behave and they start behaving better. But as time goes, we have the basic human stupidity. We just forget. We started
slack off. Yeah,
this was like a one-off event. This was unique. It's never going to happen again. It's going to happen to me. Like, COVID happens to other people, not to my family, and so on and so forth. And then it happens again. So what I decided to do is not to wait for a real accident to happen. Is just to start training every once in a while. I think we're gonna shut down the whole system, and that's gonna embed a shock, which is similar to a crisis, but the cost of it is much less than a real crisis. So Shmitta is pretty much brings much the same idea, that if you put this shock, the Shabbat Haaretz, that you leave the land fallow once every 7 years, and it's tough, and some people were hungry actually. If we have time, I'll go over the historical overview and I'll show you how it evolved. There was a reason people didn't keep Shmitta, and that's why the first temple was destroyed. It wasn't just because they didn't like it or because they decided to just do it on purpose. It was really tough mitzvah to observe. But what the Torah and the Talmud are trying to tell us is that, yes, it's going to cost you money and food and agony and all kind of stuff to observe Shmitta, but that's much less than having a real crisis hit you when you're not prepared and not ready and you don't have the mentality and the tools to deal with a crisis. The implications are going to be much more severe in that case. Now, I want to take it to another point, which also relates to the modern job market, unless you want to go to the historical review, and you guide me, which you think is more...
Whichever.
Okay, because it just flows with the conversation. Going back to the Yovel, to the Jubilee. Now, the Yovel is one of the most attractive ideas, I would say, in Judaism, in the Jewish Bible. Over the years, many people try to come with like creative ideas on like how can we like reinvent or re-implement or renovate the Yovel in modern economy. Herzl wrote about it in his book, and he proposed that he was the first one to propose that in the future Jewish state, all the land will be owned by the state, and it will be allocated only for periods of up to 49 years, which is exactly the Yovel cycle.
That's it.
And then it was
yeah.
That's true. I have a land on the Gaza border. It's not mine. It's owned by the
you lease it from the government for 49 years. Yeah, most of us do.
I think 12 years ago, which means that in 37 years from now, I'm going to have to sign again that I'm leasing it again, and then my inheritors, or if I sell the land to someone, is going to do it again. So that's something that actually, which is some sort of an implication of Shmitta. Now, or for example, people came out with all different kinds of ideas of how can we, do a huge debt relief, which was done. I think it was 2001 or two. The Western world dropped a debt of about $100 billion to the developing world. So they just forgave a huge debt to countries in Africa and other places. It was called the Jubilee 2000 campaign. It was inspired by the Jubilee. Jubilee is not the debt relief. They read the Bible wrong, but anyway, that's where they took the idea from.
Shocking.
Now, yeah, sometimes people just take the brand stand. It should have been called the Shmitta 2000 campaign.
Right.
It was still
whatever
inspired
sells.
by,
yeah.
Yeah, what's relevant to us. I think that most of those ideas that talk about, that once every 50 years we need to give all the property back, and that, I think that actually goes against the grain of Shmitta and Jubilee, because what Shmitta also teaches us is that, yes, once every 7 years, I'm going to reduce the amount of private property, but that's only because we, the Torah, the government, the Jewish people, acknowledge the validity of private property in the rest of the 6 years. So once every 7 years, we do some exception to embed some other ideas into the system. But Judaism is pro free market and pro private property. There's really no way around. I mean, you can read the Bible in a different way, but that's a very creative, over creative interpretation.
Right. I mean, some of the commentators also said that so that we understand that we don't really own the planet, like Hashem does. Right. In terms of, just a little bit of humility here when it comes to people in the world.
So it says, yes, there is private property, there is a free market, but once every 7 years, I'm also going to remind you that actually you don't own anything. I own anything. Everything you have is out of my benevolence.
What God wants you to have.
Yeah, right. And you need to remember that and acknowledge that. No, Shmitta is not the only not the only thing doing that. There are other commandments that bring to our consciousness. But I think that this balance between like free market and property, but also acknowledging that we don't own anything really, and we need to help everybody and have some social solidarity. Judaism really had like a very, developed idea of balancing those two human traits. So I think that the idea, different ideas that say that because the idea of the Yovel nowadays should be like, releasing all private property or giving it back to the government, just got the Jubilee wrong.
The kibbutzim will be very happy to hear that.
Maybe. But I think the basic idea of Yovel, and we have studied the historical context in which it was given, is that Yovel is a mechanism that's supposed to prevent a temporary crisis from a crisis. Okay.
Do you have a little crisis there with a child? That sounds like. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. It's called. We hear somebody.
Just 1 second.
Okay. And this is called balancing your professional life with your personal life, which I mean, comes as a big shock to me. That's never happened, but we'll just wait it out for a couple of minutes because that's what we're going to do. And get him back online to talk about some of his ideas. I'm actually excited about Shmitta. Yes.
Sorry for that.
Okay.
So the Jubilee is supposed to actually prevent a temporary crisis from becoming a long-term crisis. Now, how did that work in historical times? What happened is that if you took a loan and you could not pay it back for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, then you actually your only way out of it would be to sell yourself to slavery. So if you took a loan and you had a glitch, you had a temporary crisis, a bad year, no rain, something out of your control, it could very easily become a long-term slavery and really just change the entire course of your life. Now, the Yovel says that, yeah, it can happen. We acknowledge that. Again, we acknowledge the existence of crisis, and we don't assume that everything is just fun and can happen. But we're going to put a cap. So we're going to release all the slaves because we're not willing to give. We're not willing to let a reality in which small short-term crises become long-term huge crises and actually transform one's life for good.
And the whole family goes into slavery, right?
Yeah, and there's now in the other nations around us back then, if that's what happened to you and you went into slavery, that's it, game over. You're a slave for the rest of your life, and probably your children will also be slaves until maybe the ruler or if there's a revolution or some other empire takes over, then everything gets
or there's 10 plagues that hit the ruler and you manage to leave slavery, something like that, which shows you how momentous that occasion was, right? For example. Okay.
For example,
for example,
there's a huge connection between, Yosef had this dream about 7 good years and 7 bad years, and if you read at the end of the book of Bereshit, he actually enslaved on behalf of Pharaoh the entire Egyptian people. They sold themselves, then they sold their lands. They sold them the lands, then they sold themselves, their food, their animals, everything. And it stayed like it. It's not that it was like for a 7-year cycle or a 50-year cycle. They had a temporary crisis for 7 years, which just 7 bad years. It happens. It rolled into a long-term, eternal crisis. So I think that's the basic principle of Jubilee and Yovel. It's not about moving property from private hands to government hands or things like that. It's actually helping people avoid these like long-term, huge slavery and crisis. Now, how can this be relevant in our times? Maybe I'll say about that, and then we'll see if we have time for questions.
Okay.
What can be a temporary crisis in our lives? There are many. A temporary crisis that could roll into a long-term crisis. or just really shift your trajectory in life. I think there are many examples. It can be financial, it can be health, it can be family. I think one example that cuts across the board.
I'm thinking about all my friends, the tour guides and
is
people
focus.
in restaurants or anything
earlier.
involved.
Eve, can you hear me?
Yeah. I was just, when you mentioned that, I'm thinking about all the people suffering now for the last 18 months whose restaurants or stores have closed permanently because no one was out to buy it or tourists hadn't come. And I don't know if it's going to turn into long-term crisis for people, but it might very well. This is nowhere, the end is nowhere in sight here on this one for COVID. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I missed the last sentence, but I started to talk about the job market, and so we can ask this question the audience. But when I give this talk to a live audience, people can also talk on chat. I ask people who in this audience, let's say below the age of 40, still works at the same job that he or she started working on, let's say 15 years ago. Almost no one raises their hand. Maybe once I had someone raise their hand. And when I ask if it's and then I can ask the opposite question: if it's people above 60, how many of you retired or about to retire from pretty much the same job that you started 40 years ago, or maybe 2 jobs later? Many hands are raised. Now, this reality, I'm 38, as I said. So for my generation and people younger than me, this reality that you go into a vocation at the age of 25, let's say after college in Israel, or 23 if it's not in Israel, and then you just work there for 40 years and then you retire from the same job or the same career, that's almost not going to happen, except for very specific vocations such as, I don't know, doctors who specialize
doctors or something. Yeah.
They spend like
they're also not starting to work at 25. They're starting to work at 35, but yeah.
Or pilots. So my brother is going to starting to become a civilian pilot. So the training is so long and so expensive that you'll stick to that job as much as you can. But for most people, some researchers talk about that people my age and younger are going to change something like 12, 16, even 18 different jobs or careers during our lives.
Wow.
Now, it's not moving from like one law office to a different law office. It's from a lawyer to being a tour guide, and then from a tour guide to education, and then from education to high tech. Like these are going to be very, very sharp changes. Now, some of it is great because it's creativity, it's freedom. We're going to experience many different things. We're not bound to the same career for like 40 or 45 years. That's fantastic. Right. But on the other hand, those transitions can actually be a crisis, because if you didn't choose them, it can actually be lead you into a cycle. And we saw this, and we still see this in COVID.
Now
people got out of the workforce. And we're not sure that many of them, I mean, some of them might not recover all that soon. Because you just, for example, if you used to work in something that became obsolete, now you need to get trained to a new job. At the same time, you have a family to provide for, so you don't really have the time to get trained. So you just go to some low-paying job that's the only thing you have, and then a short-term crisis became a long-term crisis that's going to impact your entire life. Now, I don't think there's.
I mean, I can give you a very current example for the tour guides who haven't worked in the last 18 months. We got an email just yesterday, I believe, offering us retraining to be teachers. That people who have academic degrees can now go, because we have the knowledge, we just don't have the audience. So instead of guiding families around Israel, to go and teach 8th graders or whatever it is. So exactly. For some people, I suppose it might be interesting. But if you were trained as a tour guide and what you like to do is show people Israel and be outside and bring all these ideas, it's a big change. And if you have to put food on the table, though, it's one that some people are going to have to do. But I can definitely see it leading to some kind of depression or crisis among people, because it's not something that they chose to do. It's something that was foisted upon them because of the situation. So there's some what you're saying now really resonates. There's some very real issues happening, and that's just one example out of many.
No, it's entirely a real life problem, and I'd like to propose an idea of how we might deal with that in 2 minutes, and then we'll see if we have time for questions.
Okay.
The idea of a sabbatical year is also the sabbatical year they have in the academia or in the education system. Right. That's also from the Jewish Shmitta. It started in 1880 at Harvard University, and then it was copied into all universities and then to the education system. Now, a sabbatical year is not meant to be just 1 year to the employee. That's not the point. The point of the sabbatical year is to give researchers and professors and teachers the time to retrain, camp their professionalism, learn new things, and actually come back to the institution where they're better trained and better at what they're supposed to do. So it's for the society. It's not for them to just have fun. Now, what if we take some way and apply it to other sectors, enable people to actually pre-plan their transition to the next phase in an orderly manner, not to where profession becomes obsolete or until a crisis hits, just to plan, okay, 3 years from now, I'm going to take 1 year of training, and then I may or may not change my profession, but I will have another tool in my toolbox that I can then use somewhere in the next cycle. Now, how are we going to fund this? This idea relates to the other crisis we have, which is a good crisis, that people live longer than ever. In Israel has the second highest life expectancy, Baruch Hashem, which is 82.3, I think, for men, and 83 for women. Right. Which means that people live much longer, and our retirement system is not built to actually support that. The American Social Security is going to get depleted in 2033, which is like just around the corner. In Israel, right. The Bituach Leumi is going to be depleted in 23. It's really in this generation. It's not something like far-fetched. So what if we, and I'm going to leave you with this thought, what if we take our retirement savings and use them in chunks, some of them? So every 6 years, we take a chunk of them to cover 3 training,
yeah,
and then in order to set for that, we had a year of work at the end of our work. It's the age of 60. I will retire at the age of 68. And then financially, again, it's more complicated, but just give me like the bottom line. Financially, staying balanced, because I took one.
You're freezing. Aharon, you froze.
I can hear you.
Given, here we go. Oh, okay, there you're back now. Okay.
I've said we can use years from our retirement plan to actually like not really retire, but take a break during our work life, and then retire when we're older, and add more years of work to the system, which we need both for the social security to survive, but also for us to make those transitions more safely. So
also there are new professions opening up all the time. I mean, like 15 years ago, I don't know, web designer, for example, nobody even would have thought it was a spider. I don't know. There were things that just didn't exist. And today, as you said, there's certain things that are becoming obsolete.
But you need the time and opportunity to actually train yourself and move to that phase. For bus drivers and cab drivers, I mean, that's going to disappear in 10 years from now. Cars will be autonomous. Then they will have to find something else to do. It's and 10 years is really not too long in terms of like economic process and history. It's really just around the corner.
So let me ask you something. I don't know if it's a fair question. Are there committees, let's say in Israel, that deal with these issues that you're a part of or that you know of, where people are thinking ahead along these lines and looking at the next crisis that's coming? Obviously, we want people to be dealing with what's happening now, But is there that kind of long-term thinking in Israel and the Western world in general, or things have kind of happened too quickly for people to be able to say, it's a new world that we're living in. People are not going to be working for 40 years in the same job, getting a watch and retiring. They're moving laterally. One of my daughters said that to me. She said, if you don't have a lot of different jobs on your CV, it looks strange now. If you haven't had a lot of experience in different companies, where it used to be that it looked like you couldn't hold down a job or you couldn't get along with people in the office. She said, no, it's a completely different world right now.
Yeah, today that's different. Well, there are some think tanks that the government the Knesset actually had an institution called the Commission for Future Generations, but it was shut down in 2006, but then again in 2011. No, in Israel we say that we are champions of the world in preparing for the previous war, not the next war. So Israel has alone actually in terms of long-term planning. It's a shame because I think we pretty much brought this idea of long-term planning and long-term thinking. Our prophets were the first to actually think like thousands of years into the future, and they were right. Like they said, we'll be back, and we'll be back. They said that our trees will bring fruits again, and they bring fruits. It's remarkable. Like so we have a lot to learn about how to really think ahead and invest in this. It's
okay. All right. Thank you. Aharon Ariel Lavi, you gave us a lot to think about. Just tell us about your books in case people want to kind of get into your ideas, obviously much more in depth than we were able to do on a webinar. Well, first, where can they get them? Of course, on Amazon, right?
The book will be published in Hebrew after the high holidays, I hope. It's still in it's now going to final editing and design in Hebrew, and then the English version should be ready, I hope by Pesach of the upcoming Pesach. But you can look me up, Aharon Ariel Lavi, on Facebook and Twitter. You can look at our website, Exile, the Jewish Intentional Communities Incubator, and get in touch. And and hear about it when it comes out.
Okay, thank you very much, and looking forward to your doctoral dissertation on how the conservative small c element of America has made its way into Israel. That's really going to be fascinating. I'm familiar with a lot of the organizations that you mentioned that kind of spearheaded that, so that should be terrific. Thank you, everybody.
I'll make sure I have a much better connection next time. Sorry for the glitches.
You got it. Okay. That's fine. I'm sure we'll have much better infrastructure and everything will be different. Totally. Okay. Thank you, Cyril, and everybody in the office for making this happen. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Eve Harow, Director of Tourism and Community Development for One Israel Fund. Be back in about a month or so. You can check out all our webinars. They're all on our website, oneisraelfund.org. The webinars, the virtual tours, a lot of things that we're doing. So I'm sticking with this job, by the way, in case you were wondering, oh no, she's telling us that she's leaving. No, I love what I do. And I have no intention of going anywhere. So take care, everyone. Shana Tova, since we won't be back until then. And that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.